My name is Kate Bringardner, and I am leading the master class this morning, Brainstorming the Sermon. I own the Speaker Studio in Louisville, Kentucky, and coach and consult around public speaking and storytelling and content development. And I work mostly with business professionals, everything from CPAs to entrepreneurs, an architect. And at one point there was a professional auctioneer who was competing in basically what was an auctioneer pageant. And that was a lot of fun. Today we are going to be brainstorming with two folks who don't need any introduction, so I'm not going to give them one. Dwight and Earnest, who are speaking tomorrow. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on how this came around. So I often speak myself, keynotes and that sort of thing. And for me, my process, people ask me my process, of course, when I'm speaking. And my process is I get the topic, either some months or days, weeks in advance, and I just noodle on it, right? I let it bounce around in my head. And then as I move through life, whatever happens, I try and see what is the connection between this and what I'm speaking on. I recently did a keynote on fearlessness. And about 2 weeks before I gave this keynote, I went to Italy. And on day 4 of a 14-day trip, I lost my phone, which was awesome. And on day 8, I rented a scooter for 4 days. Now, I have no experience with scooters, Vespas, motorcycles, Harleys, whatever you want to call them. So the first place I went into declined to rent me one, which I totally understand, right? Like, good call. So I walked down the street to what is essentially Valentino's gas garage. And I walked in and I said, I want to rent a scooter. And he said, here's the keys. I didn't even know how to turn the thing on. So anyways, I tell the story of renting the scooter and talked about fearlessness. But the night before, and I've actually got a big whiteboard here, and I'm going to treat this just like a coaching session. I want you to know Dwight, Earnest, and I have not really talked about this. I have no idea what's going to happen in this session, so I'm going to treat it just like a coaching session. Like these two guys have walked into my studio, and they're saying, hey, we need to give a keynote tomorrow, and here's the topic, right? Anyways, the night before this keynote, I was on the phone with my dad, who also happens to be Dwight. And in my apartment, I have a big whiteboard that I will write things down on, key phrases or words or quotes that I think I can pull into this. And Dad and I have a tendency, a habit, and I know this is going to be really surprising to those of you who know my dad, of starting talking and just, you could talk about this and you could bring in this and have you thought about this, right? And we're just sitting there going, spinning. And I'm like, Dad, I have to give this keynote tomorrow. I'm like, slow your roll. And I knew that I was going to be teaching a master class, and I said, Dad, this process is what people need to know about. The process of developing content, of finding story, of connecting the dots, of thinking about the topic and seeing how everything relates. Because as speakers, as preachers, as storytellers, as my dad says, everything is material. So here's what I'm going to ask of you who are observing today. Number 1, I want you to pay attention to the questions that I ask. And I want you to pull these into your own process. That's really it. That's all you have to do. Pay attention to the questions that I ask, and then you start asking yourself these questions as you develop your material. One of the really, I think, good habits and habits that speakers and really all people need to get into is this idea of self-coaching. coaching yourself through the process. And part of it is learning what the questions are and then recognizing your process and owning it. Everyone's process is going to look a little different. What I do today, everything I do may not work for you as you develop your own material, but it will give you a peek into how some people may operate. So I tell all my clients, take what works, leave what doesn't. All right? So Dwight, Ernest, I'm going to ask you to bring your chairs and come sit up here. You can. Why don't you can sit next to him. One. How long are you speaking for tomorrow? Together. How long is your whole?
Well, we've got 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
I guess. You're the president.
Yeah, no.
All right.
Serving as longer than 20 minutes is too long.
Is that right?
And how many people are you expecting?
About 200.
All right. And describe your audience a little to me.
They claim to be preachers mostly. We'll validate that claim. Some teachers. We've got some mentors, friends and family.
Do you have a text or a piece of scripture that you are preaching from?
I think we've both been wrestling with some text. What do you think?
Well, I've got a text that I've been thinking about for several months.
Would you mind sharing it with us?
Well, in Luke, I think it's in Luke's gospel, where Jesus says, the 13th chapter, verse 29, they shall come from the east and the west, and the north and the south, and sit down at the banquet in the kingdom of God.
Kingdom, oh God.
Ernest?
Ernest?
I heard that
Oh, no, please.
in somebody preaching on it several months ago, and it inspired me.
Great. Hold that thought. Ernest?
I've got a text that I've been reflecting on for several hours, not necessarily months.
Just hours?
Hey, it's his process, yeah. For the past 15 seconds since she asked the question. Yeah, this is the point at which you need to decide what are you going to talk on tomorrow.
Yes. Ephesians 3, 8 and 9. It says, "To me, who am less than the least of all the saints, this grace was given that I should preach among the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ," and so on and so forth. And so I've been thinking.
Is that what it says? So on and so forth?
Do you want me to read the whole thing?
Yeah, I want you to read the whole thing.
His translation.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a new translation.
To me, who am less than all of the saints, this grace was given, that I should preach among the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ, and to make all see what is the fellowship of the mystery, which from the beginning of the ages has been hidden in God, who created all things through Jesus Christ.
All right, let me ask some questions regarding how do you guys envision this going tomorrow? Are you preaching and then are you speaking? How much do you want these to tie together? What's sort of the process here? Do we want to select one of these and we're both speaking on them? What are your thoughts around that?
So I think we're open. Dwight and I talked a little bit, having a similar conversation to the one that you described over the past couple of days, and we talked about this whole notion of story. And so Dwight talked about the stories that he's captured and gathered over the past decade of leading AoP, and how he wants to collect these stories. And I piggybacked on that and zeroed in on this Ephesians passage to highlight my story out of the many stories that Dwight is going to tell. And so we talked about him starting off and then kind of volleying it over, and then I come in second, but we're wide open to the process.
So of course, one of the things that Molly did really well this morning, and that I always encourage all of my clients to do in any speaking engagement, number one is she included a quote, right, Shakespeare. Number two, of course, told a story. I I tell you, in listening to this, the banquet at the kingdom, sitting at the banquet of the kingdom of God and fellowship of mystery, these two things are tying together for me. What do you want? This is the last piece of the puzzle for the festival. How do you want people to feel? This is a question I ask all the time. How do you want people to feel when they leave? How do you want them to go into the world? What do you want them to leave saying?
Well, I think I have always looked at this service as well as the whole event as an inspiration moment, to leave inspired and motivated and thankful that they've been called to preach and eager to get at it. Thankful to have been here, and so I think that's what I want to happen. I don't know whether my intention was to tell a story, literally, of someone who came from the north to a festival, and somebody who came from the east and from the south and west, and use those to describe the diversity of people who have come.
And you already have these stories in mind.
Well, I've got lots of stories of these people. I mean, I haven't chosen specifically the ones I want to use because I didn't know what might come out today. But Brandon Grady, the first year, brethren, blind preacher from Philadelphia, that kind of thing. Called me up and asked me, he said, "Can I come and preach? I'm blind."
Well, you can still speak. You're not mute.
I had never even thought about, the whole handicap issue, and that hadn't come up in our planning. But I said, of course, and he came. And of course, we've had a whole series of other people with various handicaps come. But anyway, so that's an example.
Differently able.
Different, is that the word I need to be? Do I need to be politically correct?
No. Be you.
Why start now?
Why start now?
How come behind me clear enough?
Okay, Ernest, same question to you. How do you, what do you want people, their takeaway to be?
I've been reflecting on the Academy of Preachers and the National Festival of Young Preachers as a affirmation of call for some and a reaffirmation of call for others. And so thinking about what this space and this organization means and reflecting on my own experience as a young preacher myself. And so part of this process, of course, is a part of this broader leadership succession moment. And so as Dwight has founded AoP and has led the organization through 8 national festivals, and here we are at the 9th National Festival, and I've mentioned in several of our sessions, one of the things that Dwight said as we were talking casually that stuck with me is he said, the young preachers are taking over the AoP. And that's kind of been a running theme for us, and I've been asking myself, what does that mean? What does it mean for me to be a young preacher, now serving as president of AoP, and this whole notion, being a Protestant preacher, this notion of leadership being called out from among the people. And so leadership is not something that is lorded over or comes from outside, but that leadership is cultivated from within. And so my story is a story of a reluctant prophet, and one who has come to AoP and each year has been re-inspired and had my calling affirmed, even when that calling was being questioned internally. And so that's what I'm...
Well, and this is there's a few things that I want to pull out from what you each said and then offer an idea. Number one, I think this idea of affirmation and doubt existing together is really powerful. I think a lot of people experience that. Because it is possible for two things to exist within us. The other idea that sort of I heard or that came was this idea of leadership succession. And is this your first time preaching as president?
It is.
I think that having this as a moment of outgoing and incoming is really compelling. We are in right now a world where there doesn't seem to be a lot of great leadership. So to talk about this idea of leadership, and that we don't know from where leadership may come, the east, the west, the north, the south.
Just a couple of things that may play into this. We didn't start out planning the two of us to do this.
Right.
Earnest was scheduled to preach yesterday at noon, and I was scheduled to do tomorrow morning. And then talking about the whole program, we decided to, Ernest decided to give up his slot so that Dominique could preach yesterday. And then I said, well, I want to give up my slot so you can preach tomorrow as the new president. And then you said, no, I don't want to do that. Let's do it together.
Reluctant prophet,
and
you.
I said, well, how do we do that? And so we talked about a number of ways to do this.
And this is a snapshot into our relationship
Yeah.
and the nature of our transition and work together. It's been,
It's the way it's been.
what you described about that is, yeah.
So, a number of people have been experimenting around in our craft, what they call tag team preaching.
Yeah.
And I guess, I've never seen it, but I guess it goes back and forth.
Yeah.
So we talked about doing that, back and forth, and then we talked about, well, you do your part, and then I'll do my part.
Yeah.
I suggested, or I threw out the idea, well, why don't we use a series of questions? I throw out a question, and he answers it. He throws out a question, and I answered it. So we talked about all these ways of doing that.
Right.
The other thing about this leadership thing, which I think about when, as you talk, is the part of my story that I think is part of the founding DNA, which I've told many times. But I'm sure a number of people here today have never, in our festival, have never heard it. Is the way I got pulled into the leadership.
Yep.
Surprisingly, unexpectedly, in the conversation with the people at Lilly, and that happened on what we now call AoP Day. And of course, a lot of people don't know this story. And so when we talk about the
That makes me think about the way I got caught into leadership. So.
Yeah. And maybe we ought to tell parts of this.
Yeah,
story.
no,
And
absolutely.
And then the whole thing about how I got called out of it. The whole thing about...
Ooh, I like this idea of getting called in and called out. You
Yeah.
guys like that? I like that idea. Right, because every one of us has experienced moments, I think, where we've been called in and we've been called out.
Yeah. Down.
Dressed down is the word. But I think you're right to share.
When you do it yourself.
Right, to share the stories. I don't know that it's something that many. One of the things you want to do as a speaker is to share stories about yourself. It's how you develop relationship. It's how you develop fellowship. And I think this is the prime opportunity on both sides to, yes, tell the story about how you got called in. This sort of, we'll say the reluctant preacher right?
And there's a lot of mystery here.
There's a lot of mystery, right? And then people coming from the north, the south, the east, the west. I think those two things are what's bubbling to the surface, along with this idea of, and this is something when I was thinking about fearlessness, I thought about is that, we think about fearlessness and people sort of, if I'm going to come up with a physical metaphor, fearlessness means always going like this, right? When in actuality, I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, innovators, it looks a little bit more like this. Right? You take that first step and you're like, okay. Right? And it's sort of that reluctance. And I know from conversations with Dad and some of the other young preachers, there's a lot of that. Right? Whether it was like Sarah, if you were at the Gospel Slam, Sarah getting up and sharing her song last night, right? She ended up winning. She came, gave me the biggest hug. I was like, girl, tell this story. Let this be a lesson, to you and to other people in the room. All right, so where are we? So I like the idea of sort of the tag team. I think instead of telling stories or asking questions, you tell stories. And then what we're going to need at the end is what in theater we call a button, right? Something you put at the end to kind of bring it all together and send it home. So what is it? We have 20 minutes, right?
Neither one of us are hoopers, but we're both going to hoop tomorrow.
All right. Whatever it takes.
How can we stir up the hoopers?
All right, so we know we've got 20 minutes.
Yeah, so what do we want for...
So we need an intro.
we need a phrase we can repeat
What
through
is
the whole
it?
thing.
Thesis? Sort of, to use an academic term, right? To use more of a show or we need a catchphrase,
Yes,
we need a button, we need
something.
this is what I mean by what do you want people to leave saying?
Yes.
Right? You want something, a phrase that they can remember that reminds them of what they heard and that they can share
Yeah,
with people
I agree with
they
that.
can repeat.
Yeah, like the sermon this morning, signifying
Signifying.
nothing,
Sound and
signifying
fury.
something.
Yeah, signifying something, right? And this is the other thing, is what have you heard over the past few days that you can pull in, right? Even that we hope this all signifies something, right? That's why we're here today.
Signifying something.
The thing that I hear constantly, both here and throughout the year traveling around, is people ask the question, how can I get involved with AoP? How can I be a part? Seasoned clergy are saying, I wish that we had something like that. Is there something that I could do? Young preachers are saying, why didn't I know about this before? I wish I would have been here 2 years ago or 3 years ago. We tell them, we're glad you're here now. Tell somebody else. And I've looked on Facebook and I saw there was one exchange with a young woman, and someone took a picture of her and posted it, and one of her friends asked and said, why didn't you tell us about this? We didn't know anything about this. And she came up to me and said, you got me in trouble. One of my friends saw my picture and wanted to know why I didn't tell them. And so this whole notion of the, the organic energy, this wanting to be a part of the fellowship, wanting to attend the festival, wanting to connect is something that I feel all the time.
So the issue of how we got pulled into it, because it was a surprise to me to get pulled into it. I think a lot of people, I don't know, maybe their story is how they got pulled into it. But the question of how did you get here? And where are we going from here?
And being prepared. And so this...
Are you? Can you be prepared?
Yeah, there's a quote, and I'll have to go and cite it, but that opportunity, how does it, that
Opportunity is there for the
right,
preparation meets.
and luck meet, or something
Yeah.
to that effect. But this sense that, and I've wrestled with this in my own life and career, that there, especially as a young person, a college student, post-college, early career, you want to plan out your life and career.
Yeah.
You say, okay, in
Yeah.
2 years I'm going to be here, in 5 years I'm going to do that, I'm going to get this degree. And I was at a point in my life where I finally got to a point where I gave that up. And after many fits and turns and successes and failures, gave up the life plan.
Yeah.
And it's at that point.
Right,
where
because it's a mystery.
It's right, it's a mystery. And so I think we have similar stories of AoP in that regard, where this was not something that was ordered and structured and said in 2008, you're going to do this and you're going to found AoP, and then in 2017,
I'm gonna, yeah. So,
It was unanticipated. It was unplanned. And of course, I remember, you talked to me over the last 5 years, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to go up pastor this church, I'm going to get this.
Leading
degree.
AoP was never.
I never had that. I kept wanting you to do it, and you kept wanting to go off here and there. And then, we had the phone call in March, and which was another surprising thing that we ought to tell tomorrow. So how can we take these surprising turns in our journey and use it as a point of inspiration and
okay, so I'm going to, if I may get a word in edgewise.
yeah.
So one thing, no one can control how or whether someone is inspired. People use this all the time. I want to inspire people. We cannot control that. Right? That depends on what it is someone hears, where they're coming from in their life. Everyone's going to be, they may leave inspired, but I always tell my clients that is not the goal. My preference is I want you to challenge them. I want you to instruct them. I want you to ask something from them. Just a few minutes ago, you said, people are always asking, how can they get involved? And where was this when I was younger? And asking these questions. And so to leave the people in the audience with a challenge. And I don't know what that challenge is, whether it is simply to be open to the mysteries, to be available to the unanticipated. And I think this idea of, given where each of you are in your respective careers, Earnest, I resonate very much with this idea of, I had a plan when I was 18, 20, 21, I'm going to go get this degree, and then I'm going to go, do this and this and this, and then in the meantime, life is happening. And to be able to see the opportunities and to be available to take them, right? Even if it doesn't mean taking them like this, but taking them like this. And I think somewhere in that is this idea of mystery. And I love this idea of unanticipated.
Yeah, I do too. And so I want to go back and reflect on the text. Well, you picked up on the word mystery.
And there was fellowship in there too.
Yeah, but the word mystery in this text is referring to a different thing than the
What's it
unknown.
referring to?
It's referring to the mystery of God bringing everybody together. So in that sense, it coheres with the northeast, south, and west. But if we're going to do, if our theme is to trust God with your future and be ready to go through the open door that God opens for you, I'm sitting here thinking, well, there are better texts, better stories for that theme, and maybe there's a psalm. So I'm sitting here thinking, maybe we could brainstorm what text would help us on this?
I think you're right, and I like this idea. I think the tension that we're talking about, I'm a dialectical thinker, so I like this tension. We've talked about trusting God and letting go of your own plans and ideas. And trusting God is not always waiting for the external. Sometimes trusting God is trusting in internal. It's being open, it's being available. The quote that keeps coming to me is a quote that has been a totem for my life by Howard Thurman. We've talked about this often. Howard Thurman was a 20th century mystical thinker and theologian. He's a Morehouse alum, as am I. And he has a quote that says, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do that." Because what the world needs are people who have come alive. And that's been a quote for my life. But the challenge with that is, it's easier sometimes to figure out what the world needs than it is to figure out what makes you come alive. And often we're trying to respond to the need of the world, and we never get to that point that allows us to come alive and flourish.
Well, and to commit to the things that make us come alive and know that there is a reason it makes us come. I just remember Dad saying to me one time, we were talking about calling and vocation, and I was like, "Dad, I don't know what my calling is, but I know I have a passion for theater. It's what I love to do. It's what makes me come alive." And he says, "Well, then that's your calling." Right? That which makes you come alive is your calling, and to trust that and to follow that, even though the path may be winding. I want to pause just for a minute so that we can reflect on where we were. So here, here we came in with, we had two different scriptures, right? And you guys, so now if I'm understanding right, you guys are letting go of the original scriptures you came in with, which is important, right? In a brainstorming session, you start in one place, ask yourself a few questions, and end up someplace else. You have to be willing to let go of that which you come in with, right, in order to get to where you need to go. The other thing, I love this idea of going through the open door. It is both instructive and a challenge. It also happens to be inspirational without it being inspirational, right? It's something that people can repeat to themselves as they are offered a choice or offered an opportunity to say, go through the open door. Even if it doesn't mean going through the open door like this, it means going through the open door like this, right? And then there's the phrase, when one door closes, another opens, but it's hell in the hallway. I think...
I've never heard that last time.
It rings true, though.
Yeah. Still, we are given opportunities, and even if we take them, doesn't mean we're going to be 100% sure. Doesn't mean that there are not going to still be questions or anxieties or, I don't want to say regrets, but it's very human to think about what might have been. And I think to acknowledge that in this process, as you are talking to these young preachers.
That's the life of the call.
Yeah, I think talking about that in both of your experiences is a very powerful and instructive thing, right? Taking the opportunity doesn't mean you are always going to be 100% sure, and that's okay. All right. Yes.
I was really a little bit called in, called out, because I think more of the younger preachers and the first-time preachers are going through the called in part, and they're scared, but there's some excitement and something to look forward to. So us older people are dealing with the called out part, and that's even more scary than being all washed up and you don't know where to go.
Yeah.
But what I was thinking is going to happen tomorrow, it's more like Elijah throwing the mantle to Elisha before he goes up there and does it. I thought maybe, I know that's not the...
Do we get a chariot of fire?
Where are we on pyrotechnics?
It's not a song to think of what's going on with the Academy of Preachers as a whole in different years is that, that's not really even the war when you say
The chariot of facing the Israel.
Yeah.
throwing the mantle.
Where's the chariot going to take me?
Yes.
Chariot.
I like the idea of the mystery, and it's the mystery of the journey. We often plan our journeys, but we often get detoured, guided in a different direction.
We get pushed off the path. We get brought into a direction. Yeah. Here's what I want to say is that all of these are good ideas, right? And each one of you is having a different thought about how you'd like to see this go. Or here's what I would say. Or here's the story I would tell or the scripture I would use. And the thing is, you are all right. Right? You, if you were in this seat, could direct it along any path you wanted it to go. And you are all right. There is no right way to do this. There is no wrong way to do this. Someone else, Miss, did you have a... Oh.
What I was going to say was when you mentioned the actual intent of the scripture being the mystery of God bringing people together, a lot of times we're afraid to let it go because we may not know that person or we may not, feel comfortable with certain people that God is bringing into our lives. So I like the mystery of that, trusting God to bring those people into our lives that are going to move us forward or take the reins and, comfortably lead us to where we need to go next.
So, where in the Bible is this the dominant theme of the narrative or teaching? I think Elijah and Elisha comes close, but where is it that people are surprised and pushed in a new direction? Paul the Apostle Saul, of course, a dramatic. But I like the idea of the gate. When the door opens, you walk through it. But is that? Where is that in the Bible? Where's the narrative that tells that story?
I'm trying to isolate one particular narrative or text, but the whole discipleship journey is an extended narrative of this. The relationship between Jesus and the disciples and the apostles, and the fear and the doubt and the questioning. Come and follow me. But I need to bury my family. I'm a fisherman. I still have to go out and go to work. Or
I had a plan.
Right?
This is my plan. But
and there's some examples of trying to go back to that plan, or I'm not sure whether or not I should be here or do this. You think about Peter, and the discipleship narratives. I think there's something there. I don't know which one, but.
All right, let me ask this question. At the end of our session today, where do you guys want to be with this?
Well, I would like to have 2 or 3 things. One, I would like to have a text or a portion of the Bible that we can weave through whatever we're going to do. I would like to have a phrase. Like she used this morning, signifying nothing, signifying something. I thought that was brilliant. And then I want to have a structure. I quite frankly like the idea of boom, 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 boom. How I got in, how you got in, how I got out. Who knows where you're going to be. So that it really is more of a tag team.
And even the AoP in the sense of
where's it going?
Right, where's it going? And for young preachers, seasoned preachers alike, this sense of letting go of the reins and not trying to feel like you have to plan because you can't. And that's the nature of Paul, that we did not call ourselves to ministry. That God called, Spirit called, and communities affirmed that call. And that the mystery is the mix of this call, this response to the call, communities affirming, doors opening. You can be faithful, you can go to seminary, you can follow the ordination process, you can find a mentor, you can get hooked up to the AoP, but none of that promises anything. It's a series of opportunities.
It's a series. I remember actually when I was studying at Notre Dame, as one of 2 Protestants in a Catholic seminar, and the teacher took a word that was very central in the Baptist vocabulary, conversion, which we generally looked upon as a one-time event. And he taught it as the constant, continuing event of the life of discipleship. We are constantly being converted, and that really reframed that whole thing in my mind. And so I think about that when you think about we're constantly being called.
And it brings in this notion of being entrepreneurial. You know, we've talked about the diversity, the ecumenical nature of our fellowship, but even in the connectional denominations where there is some sense or some supposed sense of plan and order to a career, when you really peel back the onion, especially in 2017, 2018 now, there is no guarantee of career order in any of our denominational entities or backgrounds, that we're having to be entrepreneurial, we're having to be open to opportunities as they come, to take what God gives us and make things anew. And so what we have modeled in AoP, I think, is now what ministers and clergy and leadership in our Christian fellowship globally are beginning to find that we have to do in our churches and our denominations and our theological institutions.
All right. Good stuff. Good stuff. I want to...
Take a little attitude is what you just
But
Apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Yes, ma'am.
I thought just about a story or text Joshua, call of Joshua.
the call of Joshua.
All right. Thank you.
Paul the tent maker. Paul being the tent maker.
I want to focus us just for a minute and try and strip away that which we're not going to use and try and narrow things down a little bit. Where are we, scale of 1 to 10 on it's, I don't like it, to 10, that's a humdinger, of go through the open door as being a phrase that you want to repeat or use? Okay, well, that's an answer. Okay, so 5 on this, right? So this morning her quote came from Shakespeare. So is there if you want a great quote, why not use one of the greatest writers? No offense, guys. Is there a quote, a song, a text that...
A minute ago about a person fully alive, and I thought of the great statement from Irenaeus, a person fully alive is the glory of God. We were talking about that. I don't know whether that fits or not. But
Does the sermon tomorrow, or whatever it is, have a title to it?
Not as of yet.
Okay.
not yet.
So here is the structure, however...
Not yet.
Not yet. Here is the structure I want you to commit to. Dwight, you're going to open it. You're going to toss it to Earnest. Earnest, you're going to toss it back to Dad. And then Earnest, you're going to close.
Now, you know the danger in this.
No, I don't.
Well, we're both so long-winded.
We're gonna be focused.
Right? So, Dad, I want you to open. You're going to say a few words. Few being the operative word here. And then I think... And you're going to introduce the topic. You're going to introduce the idea. You're going to sort of introduce the thesis. You're going to need a quote or the text, something in there, right?
I'm not getting any help. See, there's not enough help from the group here. That phrase, that text. But I like the idea of how I got here. And then for me to toss you, how did you get here, Ernest?
Well, who comes to mind for me is Dr. Seuss. Oh, the places you'll go. Right?
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, when I think of Joshua because of like that he's strong and courageous. We were talking about how courage isn't always
That's right.
so in your face.
I think about the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
Why? How so?
It's a journey. Courage is one of the main characters who really didn't have any courage.
lion.
I'm just
Yes.
brainstorming.
Spitballing. Ernest, you're going to need a story,
Okay.
right? What y'all need to pay attention to, or the most likely place you're going to lose people or it's going to get messy, is in the transitions. So I want to think about how you're going to transition between the two of you. This is always true. You lose people in the transitions if they're not done well, if they're not full, if they're not elegant, if they're not on point. So I want you to be thoughtful, and we can brainstorm around that together.
I like the idea of questions, though. We talked about this, of the transition being posing a question.
Okay.
And the other responds.
Okay. What question do you want to ask? What questions would you like to have answered? What questions would you guys like to ask?
Well, I've said it a couple of times, Ernest, how did you get here? I mean, that's not elegant and literary. So I've been trying to think of some literary way to say that.
Get here in terms of AoP, or get here in terms of cross ministry?
In my case, it would be how I got here to AoP. I don't want to go back and rehearse,
Rehash, yeah.
45 years of my journey. I think in his case, it's how he got called back from his vocational wanderings to the AoP and preaching. And I think that, he's got a great story that he's told me about how he got called into the ministry from other stuff at Morehouse. And then he got out of Morehouse and wandered around the landscape for these many years, and he got called back into it.
And it's AoP, and this is what I was reflecting on yesterday, is the national festival itself. Thinking about this first week in January as an annual event, for me, I think about the year, and as I said, my story is one of a reluctant prophet. And so while I am clear of my call to ministry, there are also a million other things that I could be doing, that I have done, and that I may even want to do. And I will do. And for me, it's not an either or question. I will always be doing 3, 4, or 5 things and bringing them together. Even in leading AoP is how do we bring all of this together? But you go through a year, and you collect all of these, and you begin to question, and by the time you get to December, you're reflecting and thinking about, what am I doing? How did I get here? Am I where I'm supposed to be, doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Is this a good use of my time? And then for me, it's, oh man, the first week in January is coming up. We've got to get ready for the National Festival. Here comes this preaching thing again. And, it seems heavy. It seems like something that is imposed upon me, a burden. And then you get here, and the Tuesday or Monday, the opening day, you're like, okay, I'm here, and you begin to connect with people and meet people, and you have the opening service, and by the second day for me, and you're hearing preaching and other people preaching, it's not even me preaching. I preached in 2011, and then I did some speaking since then, but I really only preached as a young preacher in one national festival, because what was most important for me and what I needed was to be renewed by hearing and fellowshipping with other preachers to reaffirm my own call to ministry. And so different people come to the National Festival with different needs. And so for me, every January, this began to become a touchstone or a totem when I knew that when I went through the year and I got to December and I began to question my call, come the first week in January, there was going to be a refilling and a renewing.
I think that would resonate really well, because there are a lot of people that, as you said, who are here to affirm their call, and so I think that's great for you to introduce that, because then people will feel like, okay, I'm not alone in feeling this way, and it's okay to feel this way, and that might encourage them to move forward with their call, or to even encourage other people that they
think to build off that too, you asked like what are questions we have. When I think about go to the open door, I feel like I wrestle with like, well, when I get to the open door, why should I go through? Or what motivates me to go through the open door? Kind of like wrestling with that.
What does motivate you to go through the opening door?
I don't know.
You just do it. It's a mystery.
The solution of answering calls.
Jonah's story.
He mentioned Jonah a minute ago to me, and muttering under his breath. And that may be,
Well, Jonah's running not so much away from God as away from what God wants
wanted him to do.
him to do because of his misunderstanding of who God is. He wants the Ninevites punished. He doesn't want to preach the grace of God to them.
Now, here's something to think about here. I like Jonah. I like Joshua too. I just went through and read Joshua 1:6 through 9. But I'm thinking about this whole notion of call and trying to figure out what it is God wants you to do in the season. There's a similarity here, if you want to go there, of you going to Lilly in 2008, wanting to do the meeting house. And you end up doing AoP, and then you come back after you decide to step down from leading AoP, and now you're re-engaging this idea of the meeting house. There's something there of
there's a symmetry and
Let me ask, and this may go nowhere, who's the Jonah and who's the Joshua between the two of you?
or who's the whale.
right, there's so many.
No, but for serious.
I don't.
And here's the thing.
I'm definitely Jonah, but
Because here's the thing. So I asked the question, these two names keep getting brought forward, right? And running from the call and taking the opportunity and being confused. So I asked this question, who's the Jonah and who's the Joshua? And truth of the matter is, you could probably find ties to both.
That's true.
Right, and this is true for a lot of questions you ask and for a lot of stories. Any story you have, you can probably put about 15 different filters on. I want everyone to have like 3 good stories. And then what you do with that one story is you say, well, how does this tie to the text? How does this tie to the episode? How does this tie to what I need to do? So if we can focus on taking one of these just for practice sake.
That's it, Joshua.
yeah.
Okay, so let's take Joshua.
We were just thinking about, I was just reading through Joshua 1:9. Have I not commanded you, be strong and of good courage, do not be afraid nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. This sense of, you don't know where that wherever is,
Yeah.
but there's some confidence and reassurance that the Lord God is with you wherever that is you may go. It's just resonating.
Yeah. So let's take Joshua for sake of practice. Go ahead and read. Is there anything else you want to read from that?
Well, of course, the Joshua story is he receives his commission and his opportunity from Moses. I mean, it's the transfer of leadership. Moses doesn't get to go in the promised land. Joshua takes over. This text, do not be afraid, is the most oft-quoted command in the Bible. Don't be afraid of what lies ahead, which I think is a great, bringing back to your fearlessness. Who knows what lies on the other side of the door? Don't be afraid of it. Walk through it. I mean, all these things tie together like that with a text like this. It does, of course, entail the death of Moses.
We can.
It's supposed to be Elijah and Elisha because at least Elijah doesn't die.
Well, that
He
is
comes
true.
back on the Mount of Transfiguration, he's going back during the tribulation.
Well, that is true.
But it's a generational thing. It's not that you're gone, but it's a generational
It is.
thing.
Yeah, I like that.
I think with the young people that are here, it kind of commissions that to them. That
Yeah.
you can still take on leadership. You can still take on your call. You can still move on. But your generation left so much breath, so much, as they say, now we can enter into the land with new leadership. Now we can accept this call with the equipping and the tools that AoP provides for us at this
Yeah,
event.
and of course, from my perspective, I didn't anticipate this whole thing, but knowing, there's the old quote, you know, who's it that sings the song, knowing when to hold them, knowing when to fold them.
Kenny Rogers.
It's a gospel chorus somewhere.
Know when to walk away and know when to run.
But I think knowing when to relinquish something and when to give it to somebody else.
Which goes back to what this young lady was saying about being called in and called out.
I really like this, being called in and called out, because everybody in life, in general, in ministry, you know, knowing when to quit one job and take another, quit one group and move to another, live in one city, go to another, is such an important part
Dad,
of navigating things.
would you be willing,
If you tell me,
able, tell a story about a failure? When you didn't quit when you should have. When I think this is also very instructive. Ernest, the same to you.
well, I'd have to think about that. You know, the AoP started when I resigned a position at Georgetown College as Dean of the Chapel and went up there unemployed, and it was my unemployment status at the age of 58 as a Baptist preacher, which are the three cards you never want to play in a game. But I had given that up, not knowing what was coming, and it was that status that generated the question from the Lily people that put all of this on the table. It surprised them, it surprised me, but it was really giving up my position without anywhere to go at Georgetown.
Yeah.
And so, because
It left you available to the opportunities that came.
desperate is another word that comes to my mind in these situations.
All right, so I'm going to ask.
It was
More spiritual word, I guess.
very vivid, making a very clear decision after many years of wrestling and feeling like it was my life call and some sense of obligation to not to pursue the PhD. I mean, it was literally, I was literally in a smoky bar. I was in a cigar shop writing my final papers for the Master of Arts degree at the University of Chicago, and had just decided a month earlier not to petition for the PhD. A 10-year journey that I felt was my life calling. The tension between the call to pastoral ministry and preaching and the call to scholarship have been the two poles that I've wrestled
the tension.
with. And it was literally in that moment when I'm writing these final papers, I made the decision over Christmas break not to petition for the PhD, had absolutely no clue where I was going or what I was doing next, and had surrendered it, that I got this phone call out of the blue from Dwight, and he had no idea that I was going to respond the way I responded.
He didn't know what was on my mind. I didn't know what was on his
Okay,
mind.
so stop.
I think this is a great part.
Yeah, so it is a great part of the story, and that's why I want you to tell it tomorrow, just like you're telling it today.
But
Just like you're telling it today.
what I want to say about your PhD, what you may have felt was, not yet, not now.
Good.
Maybe that's what you're feeling, not what I'm feeling.
All right. What time is it? What time are we supposed to be done? Great. Perfect. All right. So I'm going to ask you this question. Are you ready to commit to Joshua as your text in Scripture for tomorrow, and in a way that it will give you structure for your sermon, dialogue? Thank you.
I am.
Great.
I like this text. It's the transition of leadership. I can go with it.
Great. Good. So we have then the structure and we have the text. Yay, us!
Do we have a phrase?
Not yet. I want you to noodle on it. It'll come. And here's the thing: is that one of the things that often drives me crazy and that I have to relinquish is this idea that, that one's not good enough. I can do better than that. And I will tell you, anything you say up there is going to be good enough. Anything you say is what they will remember and take away. Of course, one of the things you want to look for in creating a phrase or creating something people to remember are a few things. Number one, alliteration. Sound and fury signifying nothing has many of the same sounds. This is something Shakespeare did all the time, right? That S sound and the F sound. Sound and fury signifying nothing. These are things that help us remember. So we like to look for alliteration. The other thing is that you want to be aware of, and this again is something Shakespeare was a master of, is monosyllabic words versus polysyllabic words. Monosyllabic being one syllable words, polysyllabic being words with many syllables in them. I want you to think about the famous catchphrases we know. Like a rock, out, damn spot. I don't know, there are others, but all of these are monosyllabic phrases. I like Ike, just do it, be like Mike, right? These are monosyllabic, easy to remember phrases.
Can I put a fly in the butter bowl really quickly? I know we only have...
That's what you do so well. In my butter bowl.
So, I know we talked about the Joshua text, but the Psalms, is our book for the week. And I just went to Psalm 27. The last two verses, I would have lost heart unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he will strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord.
Great. Ernest, that's what you're going to use to close with.
Okay, got it.
What psalm is that?
27.
That's what you're going to use to close with. If you want to dig into that and see if there is a phrase or that you can mold and kind of twist and to take away, but also, Dad, don't think too hard on it. Let it come to you, as it often does in the middle of the night or in the most obscure of moments. Don't think too hard on it. What I would like to do is sit down with you guys later today and talk about these transitions, about how we're going to manage.
I think we both need a structure.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's your structure. Who is introducing you? Or how are you going to be introduced?
No, we haven't even talked about that.
So this is another good question. Also, something you always want to ask when you're being invited to speak or sing is, who is introducing me? And when you ask that, one of the things you want to keep aware is how you want the stage set for you to come on it. Right? It is very different to be introduced with, you want to think about the tone of the event. Is this celebratory? Is this... What do you mean you want music? Do you want a second line outside of leading outside of the, yeah. And then the scepter and the kneeling, and we're working all that in. But one thing you want to keep in mind as you are preparing your text and on your delivery is the tone of the event. Is it celebratory? Is it somber? Is it instructive? This will help you determine both how you want to be introduced and how you want to do your delivery. I think the best speakers are the speakers who can adjust their delivery and adjust their tone based on what the event needs, as opposed to saying, this is how I do it, and everything else needs to adjust around me. Great speakers are able to go into a room and feel the energy and adjust accordingly. And great preachers can do that. And, and then they can bring it up and they can take it back down and they can bring it back up. And you want to, of course, this is something Dad and I have in common, something he taught me, you always want to have some humor in there. If nothing else, because it makes the gut punches more punchy, right? If it's all the same tone the whole time, people get bored of listening. They tune out. So if you can bring them up and then sock them in the gut, they'll feel it even more. You want to be aware of things like repetition, right? This is why Molly said again and again, the sound and fury signifying nothing. It's why we remember it. It's easy to remember. There's repetition there. You want to imagine your text and your speaking sort of like a newspaper, in the sense that there is a headline, there are captions, there is the body, there's the thesis. Short sentences are best. And who was it that said the best? I think it was Mark Twain. Be brief and sit down. Never worry about filling all your time. If you have 20 minutes, if you're given 20 minutes and you speak for 12, that's fine. If you're given 20 minutes and you speak for 25, that is not fine. So don't worry about filling time. Say what you need to say and sit down, which is what I'm going to do.
Thanks.
Good. Thanks for the brainstorming session, guys.